Well, good afternoon, students, or maybe good morning or good evening. We're going to continue with literature. This is literature number 9, as you can see. We're going to do another literary analysis. So we're going to look at what scene this is. Remember, a scene has a major event that happens in it. So we'll look at the characters, the leading idea, and the plot. You'll also find that certain characters are mentioned throughout the book. That's normal. So in that, if that character is listed, you don't need to list all of the previous descriptions we've done. So it's just only if something new is described. So later on in the book, if, say, Perseus, who's one of our main characters, if he's listed again and it talks about him being youthful or handsome or something like that, you don't need to list that. Just things that are new or things that come new. So we're on page 27. We're on the first paragraph. So open your book right here and follow along. It says, Perseus left the palace, but was scarcely out of hearing before Polydectes burst into a laugh, being greatly amused, wicked king that he was, to find how readily the young man fell into the snare. The news quickly spread abroad that Perseus had undertaken to cut off the head of Medusa with the snaky locks. Everybody was rejoiced, for most of the inhabitants of the island were as wicked as the king himself. So we see the people are like the king, and would have liked nothing better than to see some enormous mischief happen to Dania and her son. The only good man in the unfortunate island of Seriphus appears to have been the fisherman. As Perseus walked along, therefore, the people pointed after him and made mouths and winked to one another and ridiculed him as loudly as they dared. Oh, they cried, Medusa's snakes will sting him soundly. Now there were 3 Gorgons alive at that period, and they were the most strange and terrible monsters that had ever been seen since the world was made, or that have been seen in days after days, or that are likely to be seen in all time to come. I hardly know what sort of creature or hobgoblin to call them. They were 3 sisters, and seemed to have borne some distant resemblance to a woman, but were really a very frightful and mischievous species of dragon. It is indeed difficult to imagine what hideous beings these 3 sisters were. Why, instead of locks of hair, if you could believe me, they each had on them 100 enormous snakes growing on their heads, all alive, twisting and wriggling, curling, and thrusting out their venomous tongues with forked stings at the end. The teeth of the Gorgons were terribly long tusks. Their hands were made of brass, and their bodies were all over scales, which, if not of iron, were something as hard and impenetrable. They had wings too, and were exceedingly splendid ones. I can assure you, for every feather of them was pure, bright, glittering, burnished gold, and they looked very dazzling, no doubt, when the Gorgons were flying above in the sunshine. Okay, so here is an example of a, what did we call it? An in-between, kind of like one of those connecting scenes, or connecting information, or connecting part of the story. As of yet, there's been no major event since Perseus has been sent out. But we have this long description of the Gorgons. So, this doesn't go. So our next scene, when we get to it, you'll see how this is not going to fit in as one of the main characters, because even though they may be a main character in the book, and they may be described right now, they're not going to be one of the main characters in the next scene. So each scene is going to have its own main characters, and it's only those that you're going to describe. So, we haven't gotten there yet, but I just wanted to show you how there can be information in between scenes that gives detail to the story, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with that scene. So I'll keep going. But when people happened to catch a glimpse of their glittering brightness aloft in the air, they seldom stopped to gaze, but ran and hid themselves as speedily as they could. You will think, perhaps, they were afraid of being stung by the serpents that served the Gorgons instead of hair, or having their heads bitten off by their ugly tusks, or being torn all to pieces by their brazen claws. Well, to be sure, these were some of the the dangers, but by no means the greatest nor the most difficult to avoid. So again, this is giving us background information, just information for the story. It's not part of a scene. For the worst thing about these abominable Gorgons was that if once a poor mortal fixed his eyes full upon one of their faces, he was certain that very instant to be changed from warm flesh and blood into a cold and lifeless stone. Let me see something. Thus, as you will easily perceive, it was a very dangerous adventure that which King Polydectes had contrived for this innocent young man. Perseus himself, when he had thought over the matter, could not help seeing that he had very little chance of coming safely through it, and that he was far more likely to become a stone image than to bring back the head of Medusa with the snaky locks. For, not to speak of other difficulties, there was one which it would have puzzled an older man than Perseus to get over. Not only must he fight with and slay this golden-winged, iron-scaled, long-tusked, brazen-clawed, snaky-haired monster, but he must do it with his eyes shut, or at least without so much as a glance at the enemy with whom he was contending. Else, while his arm was lifted to strike, he would stiffen into stone and stand with that uplifted arm for centuries until time and the wind and weather should crumble him quite away. This would be a very sad thing to befall a young man who wanted to perform a great many brave deeds and to enjoy a great life of happiness in the bright and beautiful world. Okay, so we finished scene 1 on page 7. We're now on page 29, and we haven't yet encountered another scene. There's been needed information to the story, but there's been no main event or major event. So we can't yet we don't know what scene 2 is. We don't know who the characters are of scene 2, and therefore we don't know the leading idea or the plot. So let's keep going. So disconsolate did these thoughts make him, or disconsolate or sad, that Perseus could not bear to tell his mother what he had undertaken to do. He therefore took his shield, girded on his sword, and crossed over from the island to the mainland, where he sat down in a solitary place and hardly refrained from shedding tears. So he thought he was going to die in this. And so he couldn't bear to tell his mom, so he got his sword and shield, and he left. And they were on an island, and so he went from an island to the mainland. But while he was in a sorrowful mood, he heard a voice close beside him. "Perseus," said the voice, "why are you sad?" He lifted his head from his hands in which he had hidden it, and behold, all alone as Perseus had supposed himself to be, there was a stranger in a solitary place. It was a brisk, intelligent, and remarkably shrewd-looking young man, with a cloak over his shoulders and an odd sort of cap on his head, a strangely twisted staff in his hand, and a short and very crooked sword hanging by his side. He was exceedingly light and active in his figure, like a person much accustomed to gymnastic exercise, and well able to leap or run. So this guy's in good shape. Above all, the stranger had such a cheerful, knowing, and helpful aspect, though it was certainly a little mischievous into the bargain. So this guy seems to be in good shape. He seems happy, but at the same time, he seems a bit mischievous. And so if you don't know what mischievous means, it means like he's up to something. Now, you're not quite sure what, but he's got that look in his eye. Like sometimes, a little kid he's a good kid and he's runs around a lot and very active, but he's always got something about his eyes or something about him that you think he's up to something. That Perseus could not help feeling his spirits grow livelier as he gazed at him. Besides, being really a courageous youth, he felt greatly ashamed that anybody should find him with tears in his eyes, like a timid little schoolboy, when, after all, there might be no occasion for despair. So Perseus wiped his eyes and answered the stranger pretty briskly, putting on as brave a look as he could. Let me check something real quick. "I'm not so very sad," he said, "only thoughtful about an adventure I have undertaken." "Oh," answered the stranger, "well, tell me about it, and possibly I may be of service to you. I have helped a good many young men through their adventures, and looked difficult enough beforehand. Perhaps you may have heard of me. I have more names than one, but the name of Quicksilver suits me as well as any other." So we have a new character. Tell me what the trouble is, and we will talk the matter over and see what can be done." The stranger's words and manner put Perseus into quite a different mood from his former one. He resolved to tell Quicksilver all his difficulties, since he could not easily be worse off than he already was, and very possibly his new friend might give him some advice that would turn out well in the end. So he let the stranger know in a few words precisely what the case was. He's going to tell him what's going on. How that King Polydectes wanted the head of Medusa with the snaky locks as a bridal gift for the beautiful princess Hippodamia, and how that he had undertaken it to get it for him, but he was afraid of being turned into stone. And that would be a great pity, said Quicksilver, said with a mischievous smile. Again, mischievous. You would make a very handsome marble statue, it is true, and it would be a considerable number of centuries before you crumbled away. But on the whole, one would rather be a young man for a few years than a stone image for a great many. Oh, far rather, exclaimed Perseus, with tears again standing in his eyes. Besides, what would my dear mother do if her beloved son were turned into a stone? Well, well, let us hope that affair will not turn out so very badly, replied Quicksilver in an encouraging tone. I am the very person to help you if anybody can. My sister and myself will do our utmost to bring you safe through the adventure, ugly as it now looks. Your sister, repeated Perseus. Oh yes, my sister, said the stranger. She is very wise, I promise you, and for myself, I generally have all my wits about me, such as they are. If you show yourself bold and cautious and follow our advice, you need not fear being a stone image yet a while. But first of all, you must polish your shield till you can see your face in it as distinctly as a mirror. This seemed to Perseus rather an odd beginning of the adventure, for he thought it of far more consequence that the shield should be strong enough to defend him from the Gorgon's brazen claws than it should be bright enough to show him the reflection of his face. Perseus is what you might call not that quick. As you'll see later on, he needs a lot of help. However, concluding that Quicksilver knew better than himself, he immediately set to work and scrubbed the shield with so much diligence and goodwill that it very quickly shone like the moon at harvest time. Quicksilver looked at it with a smile and nodded his approbation. Then, taking off his own short and crooked sword, he girded it to Perseus instead of the one which he had worn. No sword by mine will answer your purpose. No sword but mine will answer your purpose, observed he. The blade has a most excellent temper and will cut through iron and brass as easily as through the slenderest twig. All right, let me pause here. All right. My computer with my notes is not giving me what I want. Okay. Let me do this. All right, there we go. The blade has a most excellent temper and will cut through iron and brass as easily as through the slenderest twig. Uh-oh, I lost my place again. And now we will set out. The next thing is to find the three gray women, who will tell us where to find the nymphs. The three gray women, cried Perseus, to whom this seemed only a new difficulty in the path of his adventure. Pray, who may the three gray women be? I've never heard of them before. They are three very strange old ladies, said Quicksilver, laughing. They have but one eye among them, and only one tooth. Moreover, you must find them out by starlight, or in the dusk of the evening, for they never show themselves by the light either of the sun or the moon. But, said Perseus, why should I waste my time with these three gray women? Would it not be better to set out at once in search of the terrible Gorgons? No, no, answered the friend. There are other things to be done before you can find your way to the Gorgons. There is nothing for it but to hunt up these old ladies, and when we meet them, you may be sure that the Gorgons are not a great way off. Come, let us be stirring. All right, so we are going to stop there. Now, Now we've gotten into scene 2. Now, scene 2, I'm going to tell you, we've gotten into it. Can you recognize the main event that has happened in scene 2? Any ideas? So we saw that, so we had this information about the Gorgons and Medusa. Then we found Perseus. So he's on the mainland now, remember? He got off the island. He's on the mainland. He's crying because he's pretty sad that he's about to head off somewhere to get killed. And someone shows up, right? Who shows up? It is Quicksilver. So we don't exactly know who Quicksilver is. All we know is that number one, he said his sister is going to help him. Number two, he gives Perseus a sword, and he says, polish your shield. So it seems like Quicksilver has an idea of a plan of action of what they're going to do. So, scene 2, right? Scene 2, so where are they? Anybody remember? I just said it. So, scene 2, it's going to be easy. It is somewhere on the mainland, because that's where it says. It's not a specific place. It mentioned that they are somewhere on the mainland now. So we'll say they're somewhere on the mainland. And again, this doesn't need you do need to be able to reference this as to where it is in the book, and it's on page 30. They are somewhere on the mainland. So we put somewhere on the mainland, page 30, because that's where it mentioned it. If we go back and look, we see it says, and crossed over from the island to the mainland, where he sat down in a solitary place. So he's somewhere on the mainland, just in a solitary place. But for mainland, actually, we're going to put, my apologies. I need to look better at my notes. We'll put mainland in a solitary place. So go ahead and copy that down. Now, who are our main characters? For one, we know there is Perseus. So if you need to copy something, just remember, you can pause the video and copy it. So we have Perseus, right? How's Perseus described in this scene? So we already know something about him, about being a handsome, youthful guy. So we have Perseus again. But in this scene, how is he described? Any ideas? So last scene we said he's a handsome youth, very strong and active, skillful in the use of arms, and he's a young man. So we know those. But what new things do we see about Perseus? There's two. I'm going to give you one, and I want you to find one. So the first one that I found was he's described as, when we find him on the island or on the mainland, oh goodness, gotta go all the way over here. What page is that on? That's page 30. He's described as being in a sorrowful mood, okay? And there's also another description about him on page 30 that I want you to find about Perseus. Now, who's the other main character that we see in this scene, this main thing that, this main scene? And it's actually what he does that causes this to be a main scene. So the other one, who is it, Hector? It is this guy named Quicksilver. Now, Quicksilver has quite a description about him. And what makes this scene a main scene is the fact that Quicksilver decides to help Perseus. That's the main thing that happens, because beforehand, Perseus he gets his shield, gets his sword, crosses over onto the mainland, but then he's got to stop, and he sits down, and he's sorrowful and is depressed and is starting to cry because he realized what he just took on, and the fact that he's probably going to die doing this. And he doesn't want to die. He wants to live and to go on other adventures and things like that, but he knows he probably won't. But then enters Quicksilver. And Quicksilver, his description, I want you to find that. And it's a pretty good description. It's also on page 30. So I'm going to let you find the description. Don't just write one thing about him, okay? You need to write really everything you see about Quicksilver, the full description about him, because that's what it is. That's why I gave you enough room there to really be able to write and get all the information you need to. So go ahead and write the description of Quicksilver, and when you come back, so pause it and then come back. And so now we're going to be going on into leading idea. So a leading idea, let's see, what is one of the main things that we start to learn from this scene? And I'm going to give you a hint. So let's go to page 32. This is one of the ones I got. You might get something different, which there's multiple leading ideas in scenes, but this is one I got. And it's the aspects of Greek gods. So if you didn't realize, this has to do with Greek mythology. It's mentioned in Medusa, and as you'll come to find out, Quicksilver is actually a god, one of the Greek gods. And as you can tell by his description, he's a bit mischievous. And that's what we begin to see. Is on page 32. We see Quicksilver, and he's almost playing with the guy in a sense, because he says, well, let us hope that the affair will not turn out so badly, replied Quicksilver in an encouraging tone. I'm the very person to help you if anybody can. My sister and myself will do our utmost to bring you safe through your adventure, ugly as it looks. And so we begin to see what the Greek gods, or what the Greeks thought about the gods. I mean, this is really interesting, is that the Greeks had this really idea of the gods that they were really a lot like humans, except just immortal. And we see in Quicksilver, he had this mischievous side that he just kind of likes to play around with people and mess with people. Because he could have easily helped Perseus just go kill the Gorgons and be over. But what does he do? No, he says, you know what? I think me and my sister can help out. So we're going to put, for leading idea, so you've gotten Quicksilver here. Leading idea, we'll say aspects, or you could also say characteristics of the god. Nope, don't need to put capital G. Gods, and that's on page, we begin to see that on page 32. when you're reading this book, you need to look at and really remember, what does it show about Greek gods, and what does it teach about us? What does it teach us about how the Greeks saw their gods? And as I was saying, number one, they're very human-like. They're mischievous. They can be benevolent and kind. They can be mean. They can throw temper tantrums. They can do all of these things. They're just like humans, except they've got, honestly, they're a lot like superheroes. So, and that's something else we'll end up delving more into. But if you think about it, let's think about, for instance, the Avengers movies, right? Let's think about Thor. Thor would have been considered a god. He was a Norse god, but he was very, very similar to the Greek gods. It was just, he pretty much lived forever. But he had superhuman strength, superhuman speed. He could fly. We'll find out with the Greeks, they were the same way. It was this perception of their gods were that they were these great beings, but they were pretty much like humans too. They just kind of did what they wanted. So that's our leading idea. Now, what about plot? What is the main event that happened? I mentioned it earlier, but let's see if you remember. Pierre, do you remember? It is that Quicksilver decides to help Perseus. And that's the main event. Now, let's look on, let's see, where is it? I think it is page 32. Yes, okay, so page 32. So, there's not exactly, and this is kind of an interesting one, because the actual main event and the cause are kind of very similar. So if the main event is that Quicksilver decides to help Perseus, the cause is that he's able to do it. So Quicksilver knows he's able to help Perseus, and so he does it. So for this part, for the plot, I just want you to write down, number one, Quicksilver decides to help Perseus. And then the cause, we look in page 32 and it says, I'm the very person to help you if anybody can. I think that's Quicksilver saying that. And that is law. $32. There you go. So you need to be looking to see main things that happen. But that's it. We'll get into some other literary analysis and things later on within the book. But that's it for now. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, this is for Literature 9, and have a good day.